Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nate Matthews Leader, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Maggie and Tim, and we are the Inside Agents. On this weekly podcast, we'll be discussing hot topics around football and the sports industry from two agents' perspectives. Okay, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you so much for tuning in, and we welcome you to another episode of the Inside Agents. And first and foremost, we want to thank all of our listeners for supporting us and, of course, continuing to tune in. Today, we have a very special guest, and our topic is discussing diversity in football. And we're so honored and blessed to have the great Aaron Dolores join us. He's the founder of Black Arrow FC. So thank you so much for joining us today, Aaron.
Pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you both.
Yeah, the timing for this is actually perfect. Just for the listeners, I've had a few opportunities to chat to Aaron in person and via social media, whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. Just about the first time I met Aaron was at Soccer X, and me personally, I was very excited because it was my first experience and first networking event as an agent, and I honestly never saw a platform like Black Arrow FC before. They are the first lifestyle brand in the world that focuses on intersecting soccer and the Black culture. So for me personally, it meant a lot because, like I said, there was no platforms growing up where I felt Black people could go and find information about Black football players or like Black stories, especially in North America. So to find Aaron at SoccerX, and also he spoke on the panel with MLS about what they wanted to do to help our culture integrate with MLS. It was very interesting. It was one of the panels I definitely needed to see. To dive further into Black Arrow, they pulled off some amazing feats since I met Aaron. They partnered with some big names in football. He's done work with AS Roma and LA Galaxy. And they also provided an experience of a lifetime for a Kenyan football legend to visit Old Trafford. So those are just a few of the amazing things that Aaron has done. So without further ado, thank you, Aaron, so much. It's a pleasure.
My pleasure. And the partnership with AS Roma actually kind of formulated at Soccer X to whatever that's worth. We had conversations with before then, but that was the first time meeting in person. So conferences do matter.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, dude, Maggie's a conference junkie, by the way. She attends billions.
Nice. Well, you know what I did? So I hit him up and I said I want to speak because I know when you actually speak at a conference, it gives you a different experience there, right? It gives you more visibility. It allows people to want to actually like connect with you much more. And a lot of conferences are based on people that are looking for jobs or like trying to open opportunity, and the people that are on stage are just trying to hide from them. So I figured I might want to just be the person on stage so I could actually get something out of it.
Absolutely. So Aaron, can you walk us through who Aaron Dolores is and how you got started and how you got to build the great platform such as Black Arrow FC?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the origin story for me is really rooted in the fact that although I did play soccer growing up, I was never really into the sport as like a fan of the game outside of just like playing it recreationally. And I would say that is how it is, presented where I'm from, which is in Oakland, right? Which is you do it to work out, you do it to stay in shape, but there's no big, stadium that 70,000 people are walking into every single day. So I never really, when I was growing up, I thought soccer was a Mexican sport because that was what we understood here in California. Like Mexicans like soccer. And so I'm like, I'm playing a Mexican sport. I don't know. So what really got started Black Arrow was traveling, so during the 2010 World Cup, 2014 World Cup, me and some of my friends, we had always wanted to go to the World Cup just to like party, right? It's not really to watch soccer, but it's like, all right, where in the world are people partying? I want to be there. And so as we started looking into it, we kind of figured, it might be a tourist attraction. Just, from traveling a lot, you kind of know when you're walking into a tourist trap. And that was one of them. So we put together this idea, which was like, why don't we go to Europe at the same time the World Cup is happening? And that way we can bounce around to different countries and be in the country when that country is playing their World Cup game. And that was, my best friend had lived in Costa Rica during the previous World Cup, and he was like, yo, the country shut down. Like, you wanted to be nowhere else. So our trip started in Croatia, which was the opening of the World Cup. So it was Brazil versus Croatia. And
I'm sorry to interrupt, Aaron. Which World Cup? Which year?
2014.
2014.
Okay, 2014.
Yeah. And so the opening game of the World Cup was Brazil versus Croatia. We happened to be in this like small town in the coast of Croatia that has like one of the most well intact Roman Colosseums, because it's right across the water from Italy. And the night before the World Cup, the mayor decided to like actually broadcast the game in this like Roman Colosseum. And so like here's me and like four of my Black friends. They're all like 6'5". And we all have on Croatia jerseys, and like 15,000 Croatians just like rolling to the stadium. It's like on the water, like sunset. This game's happening in Brazil. Flares are going off crazy. And so that was, I guess, my first moment as an American who, although I played, was kind of like, oh shit, maybe there's like something, maybe I'm missing something like with this game here. Like maybe it's not just like a, sissy sport or, hippie sport or whatever. And so we went on to Italy. We went on to Germany, watched the game at Brandenburg Gate, 100,000 people out there. Went to Switzerland, and in each kind of country got to experience like, how they are, feeling and vibing off of the World Cup. And so we were fans of whatever country we were in. We'd go in, get the jersey, and just, rock with that. And then in between time, we had the opportunity to watch the U.S. games when they play, right? And that was a cool feeling of, you feel a lot more patriotic in this country when you're outside of the country watching a U.S. national team, right?
Yeah.
So
True.
that might not have been something that we would have been like banging our chest that we're Americans if we were here. So prior to this, my interest and my profession had been a lot about culture and music, and that led me to some consulting works with like in advertising and with like Black advertising agencies. And so really, to tell the truth, when I got back, I saw the writing on the wall for the soccer industry to want to attract African Americans as both players and as consumers, right? So it was originally, I had just kind of written a strategy that I didn't know anybody in soccer. I was like, maybe I can approach Major League Soccer and say, hey, here, like, hire me as a consultant to help you guys figure out how to reach African Americans. And as I sat on it for a while and just kind of started, actually, this was kind of my introduction to the game, right? So I'm just learning more about the game, seeing the dynamics and stuff like that. I realized like, I don't know anyone at MLS, and if I do try to do this, it's not going to be very effective, right? It's going to turn into one commercial or one ad campaign. And I one day determined maybe I should just start something myself and try to build something up that I could then connect into the industry with. And what I guess kind of really motivated me, besides the that opportunity, was just, understanding this connection to culture that the game had. And really, when I started researching it, I realized that the history of Black people in soccer has not been told. We haven't had these platforms And so, when you're comparing the world's most important, biggest, richest game, and then you have Black people, it's like, all right, well, how are we represented in this, right? And if we don't have a voice and a platform in the most popular forms of popular culture, then that's something I wanted to create. Secondarily, becoming more connected to the African diaspora and being curious about Africa was kind of happening at the same time. And so from the music side, I was really seeing a lot of the African diaspora reconnecting through music. So you having like dancehall artists and Afro beats artists and hip hop artists, like sounds out of London. And what I realized is like, oh wow, like this is actually what it's starting to look like when the diaspora is becoming connected now, digitally. And so my logic was, what's the next biggest thing for Black people around the world? And I believe that to be soccer, whether you're in Brazil or Colombia or Africa. One of the things that Black people globally have in common is the love for soccer. And if all I had to do was convince African Americans that this was an amazing sport, like I figured that was a challenge I would be willing to take on. So what you folks might see with Black Arrow is kind of what I call the cool kids lens of soccer. I mean, that's very much driven by me kind of interpreting like what role can I play, what's not happening currently, right? You have a lot of people that approach Black soccer through working in the inner city, through charity stuff. But if you really want Black folks to fall in love with the game, if you want them to experience the game, it needs to look cool, it needs to feel cool, it needs to have a vibe. And so that's what we try to show. The Black Power stuff is what drives it, and it's starting to come to life through that as well. And I felt like one of the issues with the racism that was happening in soccer was predicated on the fact that our stories aren't told and our cultures are not highlighted, right? So if you don't humanize Black folks, it's way easier if you don't humanize us and we're not actually in the stands, it's way easier for this type of racism to happen, because people don't know that we come from rich cultures and that we're not just charity cases and these type of things. And I think the last part of that was really wanting to create a platform that was telling the stories and also trying to connect like Black soccer fans. Because when we're present and we're in the stadium, that's when, I always say, like, you would never throw a banana on the field in Atlanta, right? Because Black people, you just get your ass cooked. You wouldn't even think to do it. And so some of the solutions for some of the problems that I was seeing in soccer, I felt I could affect through, building this brand. It's a long answer.
That's a great answer. Even like just things you mentioned about growing up in America, the Black person's, like the general Black view on soccer is, it's like you said, a sissy sport, or it's lame, or like if you play it growing up, it's like, wow, you're kind of lame. Like, this isn't cool, man. Like, there's nothing cool about soccer at all. And even like you mentioned, I can't personally, like, I've been a fan of football my whole life. And it's also interesting because I read the article that you guys wrote on like why Black people like Arsenal. Like, and I'm an Arsenal fan. And that was the main reason why, as a kid growing up, like Maggie's laughing because I always tell her about Arsenal, because it's like, that was the first time I remember.
Arsenal fans are the craziest.
No, we are. No beefs towards that. I think Arsenal is great. I think it's great.
No, it's true, because like when I think back to it, when people used to ask me when I was younger, they're like, "Oh, why are you an Arsenal fan?" I would say sometimes like, yo, it's because they have a lot of players who look like me on there and they're winning.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
before, I don't really remember clubs, or I didn't think like any team was cool. Like even MLS growing up, I was like, man, that's whack. That's not for me. Like look at Arsenal. Like there's so many players like me, and Thierry Henry was killing it, and you had Vieira that was killing it. So it was like there was so much strong like players that I could look up to. And even in
Right.
the MLS, like up to now, I don't feel like there's many players that we can relate to. Like, yeah, there's Josie Altidore, and there's who else? Richie Lera. There's some players that are in the MLS, but it's like when our people from our communities look at them, it's like there's a separation between like, oh, I can't relate with those guys up there. So
Yeah.
yeah, very true.
Well, so when we made that video, I would say at the time, Black Arrow was really a hobby of mine, and I was kind of just like working through, all right, so I have this concept of like Black soccer. So how do we apply this? How do we story tell? Where do we start? And I had this conversation with a friend of mine who's a DJ in New York, DJ MoMA. And he was like,
MoMA.
Yeah, for sure.
My God. I'm from New York.
Nice.
So I don't know.
Okay, cool. So you know the deal. And he was like, yeah, man. He's like, well, I'm an Arsenal fan. He's like, Black folks love Arsenal. So, I mean, why don't you tell people why? And so that project was really, I'd say, instrumental because being new to soccer, and I'll preface this by saying that me being new to soccer, I thought at first was something I kind of had to hide and conceal. But I realized that it had given me a fresh lens and a fresh perspective on the sport, because people like yourself or other people that were into it, you know, you just, when you grow up with it, you don't really ask questions like, why do I love Arsenal, maybe, right? Mm-hmm. So anyways, when I went to go research that project, you know, normally you want to research something, what do, right? You just go on Google and you kind of look it up, right? So I put it in and I'm like, okay, well, I don't see anything. Like, where's the articles? You know what I mean? And as I started, what I had to do really was talk to people. And that was a really kind of important moment because it made me, one, realize that a lot of our history is oral currently still. And two, the history of Black people in soccer just really hadn't been documented, right? So like we know the first time Jackie Robinson ever laid down a bunt, right? But we didn't know why Black people loved Arsenal. And so I had to do an actual research like project, which I was surprised because I was thinking, you know, trying to create content online. You're like, all right, I'm going to pull from this, pull from that, pull from that. And so I found these, you know, these answers of Thierry Henry, if you're from the US, and if, you know, these players in the diaspora, like that's what kicked it off out there, right? And so that made me start thinking about all the different lenses of soccer, right? How do you think from the US? How do you think if you're from London? How do you think if you're from Africa, right? And what's the differences and the similarities in that? And then, you know, someone was like, yeah, that was like one of the first teams to put all these black people out there. Like, you know, you had these times where it's like, you know, you get 3 or 4 brothers out there, but not like 7 or, you know, 7. That didn't happen. But I couldn't find any actual like written facts on that. And then the video ends with DJ MoMA told me, actually, he said, you know, Thierry Henry is the only Black player to have a statue at a Premier League stadium, right? I go to research that, don't find any information. I actually only find the information about, you would think there would be like someone with articles that, hey, here's the first Black player to have, right?
In
London
in the biggest sport.
Right. The media at the time didn't really find that to be a story, right? And actually the story was a bunch of British fans complaining that a French guy had a stadium, had a statue at a Premier League stadium, right? So anyways, that was shared by Arsenal TV. And we also got a lot of people would say, what about Ian Wright? And what about this? And so like, I myself started learning more that I'm just like, all right, this is like our first project, putting it out there, you know, and I can only, people say they want everything in there, but they can only look at a 3-minute video. So we try to cram as much as we could in there, but this whole process made me realize, all right, wow, there's this whole history out there that not only our stories haven't been told, but they haven't even been written in the most like academic way. And that's something that I really want to be able to change.
Absolutely, absolutely. So could you walk us through your views of, you know, of us all being from obviously North America? What are your views on like MLS, and if you have a favorite club, or if you feel like there's a club within MLS that resonates with culture?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And feel free to throw in any other league within America. So if we're talking MLS, USL, even the women's league. I haven't heard you talk about the women's league yet, so hopefully.
So let's talk about that. let's make that like our next conversation. So I'll answer this one first. So again, not growing up in the sport and almost starting this brand at the same time I'm starting a business gave me a very different perspective on soccer as a whole, even globally. Because when you see the business side, and I think you guys know this more than anything, that it's not a game, it's a business.
Yeah.
You know, I actually noticed that there was one of the reasons that there was not a lot of awareness about certain things is because fans were so laser focused on, like, there's people, I had Arsenal friends that are Arsenal that were actually taught me the game through Arsenal. And then when I started learning it, when I would try to talk to them about like the Bundesliga, they'd be like, all we know is Arsenal, like, forget that. So anyways, I very intentionally tried to not get emotionally attached to any one team, just because when you're a business, it comes down to like, what's the story? And I wanted to make sure that even in my own mind, the focus was on the Black culture lens of it, so that it's not just about the particular teams in the particular leagues. Now, second answer to that is you very quickly can start seeing which teams in one way, shape, or form include, you know, shouts to Black culture, whether that's Atlanta or LAFC. And so, you know, I would say the first time that I actually really understood, better understood the game was from watching Man U games. And that was like seeing Pogba and Lukaku and stuff. I couldn't, my thing was like being new to the game was like, I couldn't figure out why Pogba was so good, why he was so popular, because he wasn't a striker, right? And that's the old world thinking of, if you don't know soccer, you don't really see what the midfielder is doing. You don't understand their like skills. And so when I started watching Pogba, I was like, oh, okay, so this is like a Chris Paul situation. Okay, like I get it now. But the best answer, or I would say the most important answer, is that what I felt was important when I first kind of launched this thing. I'm like, all right, so we're going to aggregate some Black culture, but when we're looking at America, I'm going to keep myself in the mindset of I'm creating a new Black culture here, right? And I've been very cautious and sensitive of trying to tell folks like, hey, if you want to get into soccer, I'm not going to say go like Man U and hate Man City, right? Or go like Arsenal and hate Tottenham, right? Or get a, wear a scarf, you know what I mean? Or all of these things. So I wanted to really take a clean slate of US soccer and say, like, let's not determine who we should support. Let's just create our own Black culture. And to me, the best version of that Black soccer culture is we fuck with all the Black players, right? And we also rock with the teams that rock with us. And then it also turned into when I actually started having conversations with these teams, because instantly I was getting emails from the MLS and Adidas and individual teams. And so for me, or for us, I would say the two teams that struck actual partnerships that invested and paid Black Arrow said, we like what you do, we understand your value, and we are willing to write you a check for us to work together. That makes me a fan. And I hope that that also makes other Black people a fan, right? Because a team could put all the Black players on the field to win and not really rock with Black people, right?
Yeah.
Saw
that with LA Clippers owner. Saw that with the last LA Clippers owner, literally.
Exactly. So I try to just tell folks, like, do what you want to do. You know what I mean? Like, if you're from DC and you feel like you're watching soccer because you want to rep DC, then be a DC United fan instead of a Juventus fan, right? But if there's I think the biggest answer is like finding things that speak to you. You know what I mean? And I think that's something that I would like to see more in soccer culture, because I think it's a little tired to be like, I hate this team, I don't like that team. Was that a bit of an answer?
Yeah, no, that was legit a great answer, because
No, that was a good answer.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, a lot of,
and I think we're at an opportunity here, all of us, where it's like, let's create our own culture, right? So I always look at Black Arrow as like, all right, we are, Run DMC in 1981, right? And we're not over here trying to figure out, like, all right, we're gonna do this rock song with them for like a minute, but like, let's create our own new soccer culture here in America, right? Because if we just adopt the Premier League model or the MLS model or whatever it is, inevitably it's not going to be reflective of us, right? And do we want to, what is the model here? Okay, the model here is you like this MLS team that just because you're from that city, right?
That's it.
And I would say, like, I've had a lot of Black folks be like, I don't know anything about soccer, but I like Atlanta United, right? And I say, perfect, you rock with that, right? Cats in LA will tell me that. And then the second point is, what was I saying? My first point was, the second model of soccer fan here in the US is wake up at 6 a.m., go to an Irish pub, and watch the game with a bunch of old drunk white dudes, right? So my thinking was like, I'm not going to tell Black people to go do that. I'm not going to say wake up at 6 a.m. and go to this club and to go to this bar, because that's what soccer culture is. I'm going to say, why don't we imagine how we want it to be? So that's just my approach on it, if you will.
No, that's amazing, because it's so, like, I think when I think Black Arrow, I think you guys are like a culture leader, like in general. Like, if I want to find anything going on in like MLS, or like if I want to direct anyone, because I've had friends who don't care about soccer at all, who see your content as like, yo, Black Arrow put this out, like that's cool, or they did an interview with this kid, like that's cool, or like they're like, look at their fans, like look what they're doing, like look what you guys did in Atlanta. I grew up in Atlanta and I'm from Atlanta, and it's like, when I saw it, I was like, man, like this is like literally it's the perfect mix of like culture, and like you don't necessarily have to be a fan of these teams that you're working with to respect it and rock with it and think like, yo, this is culture, and like open other people's eyes to it. Because like you said, there are people in North America who have no idea about soccer, but they're like, Atlanta United, they're cool, like I'm from Atlanta, like that's culture, like Black Arrow did this with that, like that is what I rock with because that's cool. Because before that it was like, when I think of like MLS in general, I think of it like a country club, like golf club-esque sport.
Right.
It's like, yeah, like you can have like black caddies and you can have black people involved, but it's like, how do the black people feel about it? And it's like, well, Tiger Woods entered golf, and then it's like, okay, well, black people rock with it because like there's a Tiger Woods. I feel like in MLS there isn't a
We try to
black.
get into a country club.
Yeah, we're trying to get into the country club, and it's like,
Yeah.
guys, yeah, like the tickets like across the globe, like in MLS, like we said, it's a business. Our people can't really afford to send their whole family like 4 tickets, like say you have 2 children, husband and wife, to a game. So where can we gather and where can we support and still be a part of like the culture of the club when we feel like, oh man, like we're literally excluded financially from going to support.
Right. And what we did in Atlanta was covered by Copa 90, which you guys might have seen, was a lot of like what I'm talking about. So we put together like 3 days of events. So Friday night we did this party called the Kid Classic. So this was like very intentionally kind of like an ode to like throwback jersey culture and like, you know, for black folks. So it's like everyone had to wear a different jersey to get in, right? And it was just a party, right? It was like we had DJ, we had music, and played FIFA, and it was just hanging out, right? It had nothing to do with the league and affiliation, right? And Saturday we did a street soccer tournament, and each team in the tournament was like made up of was a brand in Atlanta specifically that like represented like Atlanta culture, so like a DJ crew and A3C, which is like a music festival, and the clothing boutique where we hosted the party, right? And so we actually had that at they have Soccer in the Streets. You know about that, where they built the for people that are listening that don't know, they built a mini pitch in the train station, right? And so the idea is that like transportation is one thing that keeps young black kids from not being able to play, and so you know they envision this world where we have these pitches in the train station, so you could have a whole league that just was connected by the subway. So for that tournament, all the money that we raised, the entry fee, which was about $3,000, went to Soccer in the Streets, right? So that was like foundationally supporting a program in Atlanta, but we didn't market it as, you know, hey, here's a charity, right? We marketed it as like, yo, we're gonna have fun. This is gonna be dope. We're gonna drink beers on the side, and like, even if you don't know how to play soccer, like just come out and play. So it's very strategically like trying to make the game more it's mentally accessible, if you will. And then Sunday, what I did was I worked with the ticket office at Atlanta United, reserved 100 tickets, resold them out back to folks, and gave out a bunch of them. And for me, I feel like that was important because we had all this whole weekend, and then we had 100 people that walked into Atlanta United game, and I would say 90 of them had never been to a game, you know, any soccer game in their entire life. And probably 50% of them didn't even know at that time there was a team in Atlanta. And it's also a representation of like, I wanted that weekend to not just be about Atlanta United, right? Because yeah, that's going to be what you guys are going to do consistently, but how do we envision this world that's, you know, outside of the MLS as well?
Like community based, like everything that you talked about was legit community based, because at the end of the day, if kids are watching their club play once a week, what are they doing the other 7? Like, are they involved in the sport? How can we make it like where it's not like players, like even the 1 or 2 who are like, oh yeah, like I want to play in my community, but the stigma of playing soccer now is like more cool, where it's like, I'm not afraid to be like, yeah, I'm a soccer player. Like, it's cool. Like, it's not just for the Mexican kids. It's not just for the suburban white kids. It's for like
Right.
all of us. And like,
Right.
if like, in maybe you don't have friends who, like you said, are a part of the game at all, but they'll see a Black Arrow event and they'll be like, yo, this is culture. Like, this is cool. Like,
Right.
I don't know anything about it. Or like, I could hop on and play FIFA a little bit. Like, so
For
like,
sure.
that's definitely literally what our community needs more.
And I realized really quickly you're never going to lecture anybody into liking the game, right? Because plenty of people tried to do that to me. It was like, yo, you don't like soccer, you're an idiot. And I was like, just because you said that, I'm never going to watch soccer, right? Or let me explain to you this and that and that. So it was really about thinking about like, how do we like to do things naturally without even thinking about soccer, and then integrating that into what the experience is. So that there's this bridge to the people that aren't necessarily already into the game, because, you know, I say that like getting into soccer is a journey, right? So it just needs like a starting point. You're not going to go from 0 to 100, right? You just have to kind of like break down that first barrier of being like, I don't have anything to do on Sunday. My boy is hitting me up. He's saying he's going to go to a game, and he said there's 75,000 people, like, and there's free beer. Like, I'll do that, right?
Yeah.
Once they walk into that stadium, pretty much 90% of the work is already done, because they're going to be a fan when they walk into Atlanta United Stadium, right? So I guess that's hopefully my superpower, which is just remembering what it was like to not be into the sports, that I can always make sure that our projects speak to that mindset in one way, shape, or form.
Definitely. Which project sticks out to you the most? Like, so far, which project would you say has been the most memorable, or one that stuck out to you where you're like, wow, like I really did that, and like just looking back after you completed, because I know the process of doing it is so stressful, but like when you're on the plane ride home, or like when you actually like reflect on it, you're just like,
Yeah,
wow, that was huge for my community,
for
or
sure.
huge for my company, or just yourself.
So the documentary that we started filming in Kenya, which is 90% now filmed, the trailer's out, and we
Yeah,
just need to finish editing the entire thing. That's probably, I would say, the like most important, just like organically, and like emotionally and spiritually for me. And it came about because I was actually 3 months after starting Black Air, I was traveling in Kenya, which is my first time in Africa. And I was on this kind of a consulting gig that I was doing for Facebook. So I wasn't there for anything soccer related. And I frankly didn't know a lot about soccer at the time. So while I was there, I just kind of started asking people questions about like, soccer is not developed in Africa at all. So you think like, all right, everybody loves there, but then when you look up like where are the games and all these things, that you can't even find out like what time a game is going to be. So I was talking to this project came about from me riding around in a cab, and the cab driver, I asked him like, who's the most famous, Kenyan player of all time, and he tells me it's this guy Joe Kadenge, who played in 1958 when they were going through their independence from England. And, they had this term called Kadenge Napiria, which means like Kadenge means he has the ball at his feet. And that was a term that the broadcaster would always say because, he dribbled a lot. And so since he was he was the first, the background is that British brought soccer to Africa and to England. And so because he was the first star, like a lot of people, the word Kadenge is kind of synonymous with like soccer ball. Like kids would be like, yo, pass me the Kadenge. So he is the Michael Jordan or Will Chamberlain or whatever of soccer. And so I was like, oh, I kind of just said jokingly, like, I wish I could meet him. And he's like, oh, you want to meet him? He's like, he's a cab driver himself. He's like, I know where he lives. I'll take you over there right now. These are the only type of things that happen in Africa. And so he, took me to the other side of town, pulls up, it's like if you were in Brooklyn or whatever, or Bed-Stuy. Like if you wanted to track someone down, you would know, like, all right, I'm gonna go to this corner store. I'm gonna talk to this guy, right? So we tracked this guy. You know, I'm kind of just like along for the ride, and this, I think this cab driver's thinking he's gonna maybe get an extra tip out of it, which is fine for me. And he pulls up on the corner. He's like, "Yeah, where's Joe?" And he's like, "Oh, Joe's at the house. What do you want?" One guy calls another guy. Next thing I know, like the cab driver's like, "Yeah, Joe said come to his house." This is all maybe in like half an hour period that I just kind of jokingly said, like, I wish I could meet this guy. And next thing I know, I was walking into his apartment while he's, eating dinner. And very quickly realized that, he doesn't have a dollar to his name. And, when you walk up into somebody's house, you know from, before you even pull in, like what you're walking into. I'll leave it at that. So he and I kind of sat down, and, some of my just research from understanding that the history of Black soccer hasn't been, written, really started to kind of like be clear when I'm talking to this guy, because I'm like, big country in Africa. He's the most famous player. I've never heard of him, and I'm sure most people at home, never have. And also, he doesn't have a dollar to his name. So, long story short, I asked him, I said, would you be willing if I can just maybe film something with you, like for half a day before I leave? And I didn't have a video crew or anything like that, but I just was very like, here he is and here I am, and I'm in Africa and I'm started Black Arrow. So like, how can I try to tell his story? He eventually agreed. His kind of thing was like, my story has been told over and over and over again. And really what my story is that I'm broke and I don't have any money. So
that sounds like someone from, I'm sorry.
But it's real. It's real.
Sounds like the elder though, like done all this and like, where's, like, I have nothing to show for it essentially.
Yeah. And so first day of, the one day of filming, and I found a camera crew, and this was the day I was flying out that evening. And so took us down to the National Stadium and did an interview with him. And, he was like, can we, in the middle, at this time he was 82 years old. Now, when I stepped out of the car with him at this field, nobody knew we were coming. Instantly, like if you see in the trailer, maybe like 20 young kids just surrounded him, right? Now, the night before, after I had met him, I was looking him up, and like this guy only has like 2 lines on a Wikipedia page and no social media, no nothing, right? Nothing. So, but when I stepped out of the car with him, the way that people like responded to him, like, okay, like this guy really is like, this guy's a legend. People know who he is, and this is because the history there is oral, right? So, he's in the middle of the day. He's like, "Can we go watch Man U because they play?" And I'm like, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And that's why I asked him why he was a fan, and he said it was because of the Munich Air Disaster. So for the people that don't know, the plane crashed in 1958 and killed like almost everyone on the team. And so, he's like, I've been a fan for at this time like 59 years of, and so my next American moment being like, oh, so you ever been to a game? And he's like, how the hell would I go to a game? It's like, I had just been in his house the night before. I should have known that, we don't realize like how much privilege we have here to travel and do different things, right? And so just being very struck by the fact that here's this legend that has supported this team in England for 59 years. And when I ask him if he's ever been to a game, like he is like thinking I'm crazy for even asking that, right? So I'm learning a lot in this process. So I'll try to shorten it up, but from my interview with him and what coming home, the story that I felt like I had identified at this time was, here's this legend. Here's who he is, and he's very poor, and he doesn't have a dollar to his name, and he's a cab driver, right? This is an interesting story to Americans. And I kind of really quickly started seeing myself as like just another kind of person from the West that's just basically airing out a country's dirty laundry and telling kind of a negative story of, of Africa. Like, here's this soccer player who's poor and doesn't have any money, and right, because even if that was interesting to people in the U.S., like in Kenya, that everybody knows that, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody knows. People on the street walk up to him and give him money because they know this, and so I'm like, this isn't going to at all contribute to his story, right? It's just going to reinforce a bigger issue. So at the same time, I didn't know anything about Munich Air Disaster, and I'd seen that the 60th anniversary was coming up in a few months. And, I just basically was like, all right, well, how can I maybe create a new narrative for him? Which was like, instead of telling his story, but how do I actually create a new story for him, a new experience for him? And, with the idea being like, how cool would it be if I could bring him to England for his first time at the anniversary of the Munich Air Disaster? And so that's what we did. It's been a beast of a project. I had to borrow a bunch of money that I didn't have and take on something that I really don't think at the time I had. All I really had was like a hope to be able to do this, and that people would maybe want to watch it and one day pay me for it. But it was an amazing experience, being there with him to walk into that stadium for the first time, and it was front page news in Kenya, and Kenyans reaching out and saying like, thank you for for doing this for our legend. And that whole process really, here I am. I told you how I kind of like took to the game from seeing Pogba and Lukaku. So here I am with an A's hat on, standing at this Munich Air Disaster ceremony, the snowing and all this stuff, and Jose Mourinho and Pogba and Lukaku and Rashford and Lingard are like, they don't know who the fuck I am, but they're 20 rows over to the right, and I'm like, oh wow. So like, here we are, right? Here's the history of Africa, and I wanted to be able to walk him into that stadium, just to be able to say like, now we're actually here, you know what I mean? Like, we're represented. And one of the other things that I did too was we did a BBC Africa wanted to do an interview while we were there. And so I said, well, the Football History Museum is in Manchester. And so I was trying to figure, this whole thing was kind of like, all right, how do we get Black people, institutionalized? How do we get our stories like legit, right? And so with the Football History Museum being in there, at first I was gonna maybe like film kind of like a, like a reality situation of like me walking in there with him and be like, why the fuck don't you have Joe Kadenge, interviewing him? Like, let's call you out for that. But then I just I picked up the phone and I called them. I was like, hey, can we come down there and do the BBC interview and like maybe put his jersey up? And they were like, yeah, sure, we'd love to. So albeit symbolic, I felt like that was kind of like, a step in the right direction. Like, okay, I got the legend in the game. I got his jersey put up in this museum. We took a photo, and let's hope that that's at least the first step. So.
Yeah, man, that's so true, because I went to Senegal for the first time in December. Like, this is my first time in Africa too. And like you're describing it, when I first landed in Senegal, even though it was a recruiting trip, when I landed there, I was like, wow, like your job just feels a lot more purposeful, because you actually see the difference between all the privileges we have, but yet everybody in Senegal, like overall, looks so much happier than how we do on the
Yeah.
side of, like, just grateful for anything. And the whole time I was there, I ended up finding a player. He went on trial in Belgium, but it got canceled due to COVID, like the second day he was there. But even when he got to Belgium, he was like, you changed my life. Like I never want to go back. So it's just like things like that where it's like there's so many stories. Like I remember hearing football stories of like what Sadio Mane does, and he sends his village like hundreds of thousands of dollars every month because he's like, I don't need it. And then even Papi Cisse built a mosque, the first football player ever to build a mosque in his hometown and like his own football academy. And it's just like, wow, like these players all go back, and like even with the legends, they're always making sure like everyone's taken care of, and it's a huge community. So when I went over there, I was like, yeah, like this is cool, but like when you step into people's homes and like where you see where you're staying there and then versus other people, but then when you go there, they're willing to share everything with you. And it's just like
and like what you said about those guys being legends, like parallel that with somebody throwing a banana on the field at them, right? It's like you're throwing a banana at a god right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At a king. This dude is royalty, financially, you know, emotionally in his country. Like these guys are royalty. And here you are, some, you know, if I can cuss, some dickhead in, you know, Liverpool, wherever you are, throwing your banana on the field, and it's like, I hope my hope is that you just don't know who you're throwing a banana at, right? Because you know that story hasn't been told to you because you only care about what you see on the field. But forget the amount of money that he spends back at home and all this stuff. Like he's royalty, you know. And how do we tell that story? To hope that these white folks can be like, all right, I get it, I respect this guy, you know. Or women, and we got to get back to talk about the women after I let you.
The women's side too.
Yes,
of course. I always say, imagine how these players get treated, especially in countries like Italy. Imagine if what these fans were doing, whether it was throwing items or, you know, blurring out some racial slurs, if the players had the mentality of like 2004 NBA Indiana Pacers versus Pistons. Like, I think about that all the time, and I say, man, just imagine, you know. In fact, I think there was actually a player, happened to be a Caucasian player though.
Mm-hmm.
He went into the stands and got into it with a fan.
Yeah, it was a Spurs player. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, it was a Spurs player, and I was like, oh.
Okay.
But he felt very strongly because they were picking on his brother who was at the game, and they were picking on his brother. And I bet they learned that day because I don't think they knew that he was happened to be the brother of, you know, a player. And so just imagine, like, if they could do that to someone. And I mean, so it's just so much that goes on that
a lot of it
I
is
could talk for days and months on this, on
these
topics right here, because it's a lot that goes on.
So a very important perspective, I think, for this that I had to learn myself, right? And I'll speak to that player that you got this trial in Belgium, right? What was he thinking going out there, right? He's thinking, okay, I better keep my shit cool. This is my biggest opportunity, right? He's walking out of a country of millions of people that forget that opportunity. They don't even get a chance to be on that plane, right? For that trial, let alone get on the team or whatever. Mixed with this idea or the reality that the game is global, right? So if any team that you're on right now, you have people all over the world, in Argentina gunning for your position, in Russia gunning for your position, in Peru and Jamaica, right? China, everywhere, right? And so European soccer, they don't got it like the NBA cats, right? Because who's going to take LeBron's spot? He's 6'9" and is a beast, and they don't even really make people like that, and he can drop. So there's like this idea that like Black people are just a commodity. It's just this resource that it's never ending. So why treat any one of them? And then that mindset sinks into these players because um, they are like, all right, man, like I just got to get through this. Like I can't create any distractions. I can't speak out, yada, yada, yada. And seeing the youth systems that they have over there, they find these guys early, right? So you already are indoctrinated by your team when you're 12 years old. They're telling you when you're 12 years old, they're your teacher, they're your coach. They're telling you like you are lucky to be here, right? Mm-hmm. And that mindset for soccer players in Europe is very, very real, which is like I'm lucky to be here and I kind of better just keep my mouth shut. And lastly, where's our support? We don't have the Stephen A. Smiths, right? We don't have the platforms. We don't have the fans. And I saw this a lot when I was in Italy, because speaking of Senegal, like the only Black people you see in Italy are the immigrants that live in the underbelly of the city and are hidden in the backs of like kitchens, and you might see them outside of like the Coliseum, Senegal, he's selling their little bracelets or hustling, right? And so not the players are over here thinking like, all right, I'm from, Gambia or whatever. I'm in this country. I barely speak the language. I got my first opportunity ever. I'm getting paid. And if I say something, like who in this country is going to even support me, right? And from the fans' perspectives, they're like, they don't see any Black people that aren't immigrants trying to sell them a bracelet at the Coliseum, right? So their perspective of what Black people are is way off. They don't talk to brothers and sisters like you and I on a day-to-day basis that are fortunate to have privilege and education and stuff like that. And so this is not an excuse for them, but just understanding that, these guys are in a very tough situation, and the last part of that is the dynamic of the game, right? Like you're a defender, you're a midfielder. It's so much easier for these coaches to be like, you're out of shape, right? The game has this, kind of ebb and flow that it's very hard to determine like specifically what your value was in like that game, lack of statistics, for instance. In the US, it's like, no, I hit a home run over the fence, so I'm going to play tomorrow and you guys are going to respect me, right? Or I had 20 points and 10 rebounds. It's very clear where you fit in, and that for soccer, they're just like, we could go get a guy from Japan that we rate the same as you, right? Yeah. So it's just a crazy mindset. And then the very last part of that is the media. So, we have a partnership with AS Roma. We did the interview with Justin Kluivert and some other players too. Juan Jesus, who was a Black Brazilian, and this other brother that played on the French national team. I'm forgetting his name right now, but they've never seen media like looking like me, right? And then again, these guys are players first, so they're like, all right, train, and then my team tells me to talk to ex journalists, right? And so the way the Kluivert thing came about was we had already done the interview with the two other Black players, and then I hadn't even spoken to Kluivert, and the PR guy from Roma said, yo, Kluivert wants to invite you guys to the house to do the interview, right? They were like, we don't even know where he lives. And that was based on the fact that he saw me and I look like him, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, wow, this is media now, you know what I mean? And so he knows that I'm there to tell his story, that I'm there to talk positively about him. And it's just a very long way to point out that these guys are really, in a rock, stuck between a rock and a hard place, because they say anything to the media gets misconstrued. I mean, he doesn't look like them. And so everywhere these guys turn, and I don't feel sorry for them because they could be just homeless in much worse cases, right? But it's interesting.
Even like just look
Yeah,
at Raheem Sterling. All the time you see stories about him where he does nothing, literally nothing in the media, out of order.
Right.
But
and it
like
gets misconstrued all the time.
he buys a house. It's a problem because he's greedy. But then one of his teammates buys a house for his mother, and then there's like, oh, he's praised when Raheem does the same thing. So it's like it's so blatantly biased towards them. So I
bring this up
and I think
all
it
the
also
time.
has to do with. I was gonna say it also. You touched on this when you said as far as media and those players seeing someone that looks like them. Nate and I have this conversation all the time. That's part of, at least for the both of us, that's part of our mission to change that, because you know, if even look at agents. How many agents are really African American that you can count and say, wow, there's about 5 good agents that are moving players. So other players are like, well, I'm going to go over there. It's really, you can probably count on one hand, honestly. You can count
the players
on one
might be
hand.
thinking, what is my deal going to look like if I send a black person in there? Like, I know how these people think about me already, like on the field. How are they going to think about my agent if they're black, right?
Exactly.
And the Raheem Sterling,
attorneys, all of that.
Right. The Raheem Sterling one is always an example that I try to bring up, right? Because why do we know about him as the one that stands up? Because he's one of the best players in the world, right? But what if he was the brother? I'm gonna ask you guys this: what if he was the last brother on the bench?
Oh no, he's getting released. That's what's happening.
Yeah, he's gone, right? Like this, and the additional element to that, which took me a while to realize this, is that he plays for the English national team, right? So he's in a different position than Sadio Mane and Pogba, right? Because they can't get rid of him, and they want him to win, right? For them to win World Cup games, and this is where the national identity in race really comes into play, because Raheem Sterling and Rashford and Lingard are going to get away with just a little bit more than that brother from Senegal, right? Or the brother from Nigeria or whoever, who they're like, yo, you're lucky to be here. And so I try to always, preach the fact that, like, let's not just let the really good players voice their opinions. Like, we have to, let that come from everybody. It's a crazy circumstance.
Yeah, that's true. How did COVID affect you? How's it affecting your work going forward?
I think I hope it's going to end up being like a net positive for me, because I think a lot of the potential partners and clients that we've been talking to, I think they want to tell Black stories generally, or they want to work with us. But when you're running a team or a league or whatever, like, sometimes that becomes like secondary. So I think it's given them a little bit of time to like plan and think. And so I hope that coming out of it will be in a good spot. Yeah. We were going to talk about the women's game on it.
Definitely.
But yeah, so we were gonna get into the women's football. I'm curious about your stance on that, on the women's football as a whole, as far as culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I'll start with like calling myself out first. We were, I think, slow to discuss and talk about the women's game. And a lot of that is driven by like the fact that we're trying to introduce this game to people that really sometimes have a like adversarial opinion on it. And so we really tried to focus on like, hey, like, let me show you these superstars and kind of like the popular things that are easier for people to take to. But one of the original videos that we did was highlighting the Black women of the U.S. national team. And that video actually did really well. And, it's, for me, everything that we go through as Black folks is the same but magnified for the Black women in the game. And so we just did this photo series of this Black German woman named Eunice. And we sent a photographer out while she was in Ghana for the year of the return because her family's from Ghana. And we did another one in Nigeria that told the story of this young Nigerian girl who was, trying to play professional soccer and trying to kind of like show what the personal experience is like, right? Like you're trying to juggle friendships, your parents, you're trying to go to school, you're trying to do all this, and you're also trying to play soccer. So, I want to be, hand in hand with the women's game. I see the same issue that we get for Black folks, which is like they always want to talk about Black folks when it comes to like charity and like inner city stuff. And so for women, it's difficult because everybody wants to talk about the negative things that surround the game instead of just being like, no, like you should like her because of who she is as a player, and because of her game and her story and those type of things. So, my business is predicated on the stakeholders in the industry writing checks for us to like work with them to like to be able to what they do. The NWSL doesn't really have those checks per se, and it's never something that I could charge an actual player for as well. So we are put into a very similar position of like, what's the question? I'm gonna ask you guys, what's the question everybody wants to know in soccer? Who's writing the check, right? Where's this coming from, right? And if nobody's saying it, everybody's thinking about it, right? All right, we'll get people that will be like, reach out to us and be like, why don't you guys, fly to Baltimore and, tell a story of this, summer camp in the inner city? I'm like, okay, well, who's going to pay for that flight? You know what I mean?
Crickets.
Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
I just had a kind of a private phone call that I was telling you guys about with some of the different like figureheads in Black soccer. I brought the woman, Eunice, in there, and I wanted to like make sure that as Black folks are thinking about what we're doing, we're including that voice. And I guess I would also say that my lens of soccer is I put on two hats, right? When it's time to make money, then it's like, let's talk to the big guys, right? The Adidas, big teams. And then when it's time to like do our own stuff is like the grassroots stuff, right? So the women's game, street culture, and all of these other things. And, you learn very quickly who in this business is extracting from the game, right? And who's actually trying to like build the game. And so to any degree that I think we should be doing a much better job, like our focus and our lens is always going to be to like build and not just like extract.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. You mentioned earlier, you talked about.
Oh, and one more. I did this panel for Black History Month 2 years ago, and I was on there with Crystal Dunn. And I think that was the first time I really got nervous, like actually meeting an athlete. And I honestly hadn't like seen her play, but that many times. I mean, I hadn't really like watched her play that much. But anytime you're in the presence of like the women's U.S. national team, like they're just bad as hell. I mean, you know what I mean? Like these are the most like these are the best athletes in our country. And it was like a cool. There's been a few moments in like I get a chance to sit back and be like, wow, I was just like sitting there talking to Crystal Dunn, and then during the World Cup, you know, and I'll say like, you know, they put the system in the back. Oh, you're gonna play defense, right? Where she's really usually plays up front, but watching her through the World Cup, like play her, you know, left back or whatever it was, I think was like one of the coolest things as in soccer, because she's just like so badass out there, and you know, there's too much of this like where one's the next LeBron, and it's like, well, we got Crystal Dunn right here, so like let's just see her as that, you know. So shout out to Crystal Dunn. I have her jersey, and I have two women's. I have her jersey, and then I have the Portland. Frank. She's the goalie. Spacing on her name. But I wear my Crystal Dunn jersey. I wore it to the LAFC game, and everybody was like, "Dope," you know. So.
Yeah, that support is real. I had the pleasure of watching her play last year in France, you know, during the World Cup, and of course, I mean, she was always phenomenal, and having to have worked the 2018 men's and then the women's last year, man, when we talk about culture and we talk about seeing people that look like us, most of the people that I was seeing that look like me are people that were from another country. So whether they flew in from Africa, or they flew in from Germany or France or wherever, it was different.
Right.
But it sparked so many different fires within me that it was like, man, this has to change. And I always, you know, even tell Nate and just with other people, that was part of the reason that I really wanted to get into the player agent side. Because also, even at the Women's World Cup, it was not the same crowd as it was for the men's. But also, too, I just wasn't seeing people that look like me. I wasn't seeing, I was not seeing Black male agents, nor was I seeing Black female agents. I wasn't really seeing too many attorneys. And when we talk about media, forget about it.
Right. Yeah.
Like next to none, you know?
Yeah. And I think it's important I always say, like, Black folks, we have the juice, right? And I know that the women's game has a juice that the men's game does not have, right? Because they're better in the U.S., right? By far, like not even a question. So that's a hard dynamic for America to like figure out, like, why are our men not the best? This is not making sense. And then you have the women who are like, nah, like we actually we are. And then second is like although there might be technically less fans, the fans of the women's game are way more passionate, way more supportive, way more diehard, way more supportive. Men as fans are like, all right, we'll like you if you win and fuck you if you lose, right? We'll turn on you in a second. And so the women's game has something that these corporations are going to come for, which is this commitment and this drive and this passion that the women have for the game, not just the players but the fans, and they want in on it. They just don't know like how to. They're trying to figure out how can we extract from this right now, and so I think more Black people, more women's owners, more women agents, more women, you know, all of these things to make sure that as the game grows, that the women have equity in it as well, you know.
Yeah, we're all about that equity for sure. I know you spoke before about, well, Nate always, you know, Nate and I, we always joke around. He's like my brother, so we talk about any and everything. But so earlier, what I was going to get into also was about when you mentioned briefly about COVID, I mean, we've seen this obviously global pandemic. We've seen what it has done, especially for the sports industry and all industries and just overall, right? Has COVID affected any projects that you were working on for Black Arrow?
So we did our big launch event with the LA Galaxy was at their home opener, and that was like basically 3 days before everything shut down. We released a short video which profiles this rapper from Compton. It's kind of like a shout out to their jersey, and we did another video that tells the story of this black skater from Compton also, who grew up right around the stadium, and the video kind of parallels why he took to skateboarding, which is like because of the skateboarding community that really was diverse and brought him in and all this type of stuff, and we parallel that to kind of like how people feel about the soccer community. And we were able to take him to like his first wasn't an actual game, but it was like a warm-up game down on the field, and he got to meet Kobe Jones, and so it was like both of these and we took the rapper there too, and I'll just touch on that as well, which is like I try to create projects that allow me to envision what I'm trying to get across, which is like, if we're not into the game, how do we tell stories about people going to the game for their first time and like covering that? Because what the soccer industry wants to do is like, they want to be like, all right, we got to find the guy who's already die hard, who's black, and tell his story. But what do you do when they don't exist, right? Like, they were hitting me up in Atlanta, like, all right, where's all the diehard Atlanta fans? And I'm like, they're not really there yet, but just wait. So that, long story short, that video, the skater video, is still in the works. But during COVID, like ourselves and also get more for the Galaxy, like they can't really like. It's such a sensitive time, and even right now, that they their feeling is like, as a brand, we can't just be like putting out content like. We have to kind of address what our fans are going through. So, I would say that that's just been put on hold, and now with these protests, everything else is kind of also, put on hold. And, my hope is that this whole thing, well, with soccer being the first kind of big sport to come back without any fans, I think it's pretty clear to everybody like that none of these sports make any sense without any of the fans in the building. And, my hope for this COVID thing is that fans can kind of like get some, we get priced out of games and all of these things. And so, my hope is that now we have to technically risk our lives to go back into watching these games, right, and spend our money. So I'm hoping that this gives fans a little bit more value in this whole ecosystem.
Absolutely.
Perfect. What can we expect going future? What are your goals for Black Arrow going forward? And what do we need to do as a community to make soccer culture cool in North America? What do you think?
So we have this big project coming out, which is a documentary that we are filming with AS Roma. Everything is filmed, and it's we're finalizing the editing stage. So that should hopefully be coming out, I'd say, in the next month. We also did like a jersey collaboration with them. So that should be coming out as well. And, I would say that what the goal of Black Arrow is to build this out to be kind of a full-fledged media company, right, where we have, constant forms of programming from day-to-day stuff to YouTube shows to, similar to what you might see in Vice or something. And so that's what I'm working on the back end, which is how do we expand our concept and have more things that are happening so it's partially working with the teams in the leagues, and then really creating more programming for Black Arrow that's consistent, that allows us to constantly be creating content, through this lens. And I think it's this protest. I'm not going to be an opportunist, but it's really kind of united a lot of the folks on the Black side. And I think what we hope is like, hey, if you're a player and you want to give your story, like give your story to us first, right? And if you're a fan, follow us, So just I think growing and and checking in on us and signing up for our email list and things like that. So how can I help you guys? Before we wrap up, like I'm curious from the agency side how you guys are seeing things.
I mean, you're doing it already. I saw you guys shared. So one of my clients, Hugh Roberts, has been extremely vocal on, social injustice, racism. We constantly have discussions regarding that. And so when he first wanted to release his tribute to Ahmaud Arbery, and then, we had to talk after, of course, the unfortunate passing of George Floyd, and we spoke about that. And I said to him, you know what? It's not even about recording a new piece, because what you've already touched on in this video, it applies to this as well, because it's 100%. Pretty much the same issues. It's the same issues. And so when I saw that that you guys had, reposted it and shared it, I was like, I immediately texted him and I was like, yo, Black Arrow shared this, so that's a good thing, because for now sure. that it's like you guys are like the staple of Black culture within soccer. So
I hope so.
I feel like if you guys are sharing it, he's doing everything right. And then of course just having other media that was able to pick it up as well. And so I think just continue to be that resource.
Yeah.
Just continue to be that resource for us, because that's, especially for these players, man, I feel like more players globally need to know. And so and I'm sure Nate feels the same, and I'll let him share on that too. But just for me, the players that I represent, the players that I have relationships with, just kind of introducing them to the platform of Black Arrow if they don't know.
Right.
So, it's like we're just helping each other on both sides.
For sure. Yeah, and I've met so many different players like Kellen Acosta and all of these guys, and I loved it because Zach Steffen was following our page before I even had 3,000 fans, and it's really cool because I feel like that is what I love about soccer, is this accessibility that you have, and these brothers are all, I'm telling you, like every Black soccer player that I have talked to has been like, yo, I rock with what you're doing. You know what I mean? And that motivates me, and what I have to do is create more of a mechanism to actually be able to figure out. So we did an article on Kellen Acosta one time. And that was kind of how I built the relationship with him. And so, one thing that I'm trying to figure out is how do I create more of a mechanism to be able to constantly be telling the stories, right? Because what if, your client Hugh didn't go film that video on his own, right? Who would have done it? Most football players are not going to do that. Mm-hmm. So, it's something that I think about constantly, because to start, what I was doing is aggregating a lot of soccer content that's coming up, and his was then I deleted all of that because I said look, if we're not creating the original content ourselves, then we're not really creating pure value in this industry, right? It needs to look like us, feel like us. It needs to be our messaging. I can't spend my entire life on Google images, posting photos about Pogba and these type of things. So I think it's really something that we can all think about, because I've had other players' agents reach out to me what can we be, what can we do, right? And the Justin Clivert interview is important because AS Roma paid for it, right? And so I wouldn't have been able, even if Clivert said, yeah, I'm down to do it, like I got to pull $5,000 to go fly to Italy and, to try to get 20 minutes with them. So I'm really curious about how we can work together so that we can get this content, get this stories up, and what are the processes and mechanisms that in the communication that we can do in order to be able to do that,
Yeah, we can definitely talk offline regarding some really cool things.
Please,
for sure,
let viewers know your handles, where to follow you, where to find you, all of that before we wrap this up.
Yeah, so it's just Black Arrow FC pretty much everywhere you go. If you put that in, or if you just go to Google and type Black Soccer, we show up. www.blackarrowfc and Black Arrow FC on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook as well. Yeah, for you too as well, we have a Facebook group with about 1,000 different Black folks all over the world. That it's kind of our private, space where Black folks can have conversations, internally about, articles and news stories as well. So we get a lot of people that join that Facebook group, and it's something that I want to activate more so that we have a digital space where we can also be in contact,
Absolutely. That's
Perfect.
Amazing.
Thank you so much, Aaron. This is Nate, leader, Maggie, Intim, and Aaron Dolores with our topic on diversity in football. Thank you so much, Aaron. It's always a pleasure. Blacks in football. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to have. Thank you so much.
All right, thank y'all.
Yep.
Appreciate it.